You've heard about Dianetics, the #1 self-help bestseller by L. Ron Hubbard.
You've seen the commercials.
Are you using your mind to the fullest?
Touting the benefits of the Church of Scientology.
Clear away your negative feelings and unblock your true potential.
Dianetics? It's amazing.
Stars such as John Travolta and Tom Cruise say that Scientology has changed their lives.
In drug rehabilitation, L. Ron Hubbard discovered the first proven techniques to rid people of the harmful effects of drugs. Using no drugs, his methods have salvaged the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and are used by Narconon, who have the world's best statistical rate of success exclusively using L. Ron Hubbard's technology.
L. Ron Hubbard was given Vistarol by Dr. Gene Dank in his final days by intramuscular injection in the right buttocks. Vistarol is a psychiatric drug used to calm frantic or overly anxious patients. He died on January 24th, 1986, 8 days after a fatal stroke. Reminiscent of the final days of Howard Hughes, Hubbard's fingernails and toenails were long and unkempt. His hair was long, thin, and receding on his forehead.
Considering that Church of Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard himself left behind a doped corpse when he left for the next level, it is indeed curious to note that Scientologists are encouraged to be drug-free, and the drug treatment facility he began, Narconon, has been in existence for over 30 years, expanding to over 24 countries and taught in thousands of prisons and schools worldwide.
L. Ron Hubbard was taking a powerful psychopharmaceutical drug when he died, but according to the Scientology scriptures that he composed, evil space aliens control and manipulate Earth's psychiatrists via mental telepathy, and psych drugs are used by these space aliens to control and enslave humanity. This leaves one asking, if Scientology scripture is true, how did the space aliens finally get at Hubbard? Or is there some other explanation for this hypocrisy?
Do you use drugs in any way?
No, never. No drugs.
What do you make of science? I only made it around 200 pages into Dianetics, and my head exploded like I was in a David Cronenberg film. But what do you make of it?
I know that it's about you go into a desert and there's a ship somewhere, and then you sign a huge check, and if you don't, they'll kill you. That's all I really know about it.
Well,
that's about it.
Those are the cliff notes.
Those are the cliff notes right there. When you're in a hurry, you've got to know something quick.
Amidst the flurry of tales, it's difficult to decipher the truth. To really understand Scientology, it's necessary to go back in time to the genesis of the religion and its founder, L. Ron Hubbard. Lafayette Ronald Hubbard was born in 1911 in Tilden, Nebraska. An adventuresome spirit, Hubbard made trips to Guam and China as a teenager, described romantically in his teenage diaries.
You're talking about a young L. Ron Hubbard. You're talking about someone who shot sharks, who scaled erupting volcanoes, who explored the jungles of Asia. I mean, you're talking about Indiana Jones, but for real.
He did some small thing and that just blew up in his own mind. He had a very dangerous imagination. Even when he was 19, he was starting to inhabit a fantasy world.
That fantasy would be put to use in the 1930s, when Hubbard dropped out of college and began to write for a living. Unusually prolific, Hubbard moved to New York and became a popular writer of adventure and science fiction stories. But those who knew him recall that Hubbard had other ambitions.
I knew Ron Hubbard before he ever started Scientology. I was in a writing group with him in Greenwich Village. And he kept saying that, the only way to make any money, you can't do it with pulp writing. You start a religion. And nobody took him very seriously.
Although he'd like to claim it was from a vision inspired from a near-death experience, it may have been L. Ron's strange relationship with drugs that initiated his first sci-fi fantasy, a book which he believes laid the groundwork for his later philosophical achievements.
But Hubbard's most amazing story was about himself. His literary agent was Forry Ackerman, himself a sci-fi fanatic. One night, deep into the small hours, Hubbard told Ackerman of a bizarre event in a hospital theater. It was an event that would shape his entire life.
He said that he had died on the operating table. And he rose in spirit form, and he looked at the body that he had previously inhabited, and he shrugged the shoulders he didn't have anymore, and he thought, well, then where do we go from here? Off in the distance, he saw a great ornate gate. And it looked kind of interesting to him, so he walked it over to it, and the gate, as they do in supernatural films, just opened without any human assistance. He floated through, and on the other side, he saw an intellectual smorgasbord of everything that had ever puzzled the mind of man. You know, how did it all begin? What is God's purpose? Where do we go from here? Are there past lives? Are there future lives? And like a sponge, he was just absorbing all of this esoteric information. Then all of a sudden, there was kind of a swishing in the air, and he heard a voice, no, not yet, he's not ready. And like a long umbilical cord, he felt himself being pulled back, and he lay down in his body, and he opened his eyes, and he said to the nurse, I was dead, wasn't I? Then he bounded off the operating table. I don't know how you die, and the next minute you're bounding off an operating table. He got 2 reams of paper and a gallon of scalding black coffee. And at the end of 2 days, he had a manuscript called Excalibur, or The Dark Sword. And he told me that whoever read it either went insane or committed suicide. And he said the last time he had shown it to a publisher in New York, he walked into the office to find out what the reaction was. Publisher called for the reader. The reader came with a manuscript, threw it on the table, and threw himself out of the skyscraper window.
But was Hubbard's extraordinary story true? Excalibur became the stuff of mystery. Hubbard told friends it was too dangerous to publish. But 40 years later, a treasure trove from Hubbard's early journals and manuscripts, believed to have been long lost, was discovered by his staff.
There were 2.5 versions of Excalibur. I read them, and I didn't go mad and didn't die. They also include the information within related writings that these came out of a nitrous oxide incident. Hubbard had a couple of teeth extracted, and it was while under the effect of nitrous oxide that he came up with Excalibur.
Hubbard's death was in fact an hallucination under the effects of anesthetic. So what was the intellectual dish he'd fed on?
It's not particularly revolutionary. The key to Excalibur was this great realization by Hubbard of survive as being the one command that all existence and all life and all people have. That became the basis for a lot of Dianetics and a lot of Scientology.
This idea had a profound impact on Hubbard. In a letter to Polly, he wrote, I have high hopes of smashing my name into history so violently that it will take a legendary form.
Sometime after allegedly trying to bilk the Navy out of permanent disability funds for ulcers he developed while in naval service, Hubbard met and befriended pioneering rocketeer and occultist Jack Parsons. Besides being one of the founders of Caltech, Jack Parsons had the dubious honor of being the only pothead with a crater on the moon named after him.
Hubbard and Parsons shared adventurous and creative spirits. The two apparently shared another fascination, that being a taste for the occult works of Aleister Crowley, the English magician who fancied himself the beast 666 of the Book of Revelation.
In 1945, after a 4-year stint in the Navy, Hubbard became involved in ritual magic with a protege of British Satanist Aleister Crowley.
They start performing ceremonies to find a woman who'll be willing to be the mother of an incarnation of the Antichrist, Babylon. Sexual ceremonies were performed between Parsons and Cameron, with Hubbard watching and telling them what to do and observing things on the astral plane. And this was meant to, she would become pregnant, and they would control this elemental destructive force. I can't emphasize this too much. Hubbard was trying to incarnate pure evil so that he could control it to his own end.
L. Ron Jr. records that his father had first been made aware of the books of Crowley in his teenage years, when, while visiting the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., he discovered Crowley's infamous Book of the Law, a tiny booklet that Crowley claimed was channeled from discarnate Egyptian deities and promised a new era for humanity.
Really, the basis of Scientology, which is rather hidden and covered over, is the occult, the deep involvement with satanic powers. We felt that he was deeply involved with a British black magician called Aleister Crowley, and through putting himself in deep hypnotic trances and the use of drugs on himself, he wanted to become the most powerful being in the world.
He was very deeply involved in black magic from early teenage years, which was the use of drugs and hypnosis as an example. He used to conjure up these demons and thereby plug into them or have them plug into him, and a lot of his early writing was, which could be called spirit writing. And so he was very deeply involved in black magic as an example, especially from Aleister Crowley, which was an English black magician. And around 1947 or so, he decided that he was the Beast 666 incarnate, because that's what Aleister Crowley was, and he died in 1947.
The use of both sex and drugs in Crowley's form of magic cannot be understated. In an interview with Penthouse magazine in 1983, Hubbard answered a question in relation to his father's use of drugs. Did your father take a lot of drugs?
Yes, since he was 16. You see, drugs are very important in the application of heavy black magic. The personal use of drugs expands one's conscious ability to break open the doors to the realm of the deep.
What kind of drugs did he generally use?
At various times, just about everything, because he was quite a hypochondriac. Cocaine, peyote, amphetamines, barbiturates. It would be shorter to list what he didn't take.
According to Ron Jr., his father used drugs and self-hypnosis in order to beef up his will.
For years he used, even in the 30s, sound scribers. I think you would call it that. The original dictaphones, and IBM had one too, and he would read these, what he called the affirmations, into the dictaphone. This is when they were non-erasable. You know, the old Edison with the wax cylinder. He would write these up, or he'd take quotes from the Book of the Law and other places, and then he'd take whatever he had in the way of drugs and play them back. Usually he used headphones.
Hardly anyone believed Ron Jr. when he told this story, but the affirmations in their original handwritten version were brought into evidence in open court in Los Angeles in mid-1984 and are part of the court record. After being discharged from the Navy in December of 1945, Hubbard did not head for home, where his wife and 2 small children were living in Bremerton, Washington. He instead headed directly for a house in Pasadena, California, where an eclectic assortment of people lived, including aforementioned rocketeer Jack Parsons, who owned the estate. At that time, Parsons was head of the California branch of the Order Templar Orientis, or OTO, a Masonic brotherhood that was headed by Aleister Crowley.
But the church insists that Hubbard's participation in the alleged rituals was part of a government mission.
We know about L. Ron Hubbard. He was sent in by one of the American security forces with a brief to shut the thing down, which effectively he did.
Parsons was seen as a person of interest at the time as quite obvious. Rumors of cannabis smoke and erotic rites taking place on Parsons' estate, where he had a number of bohemian and occultists living with him, had his 1940s neighbors quite concerned, and both the FBI and local police had investigated him.